Hello and welcome to Yoga with Carolyn. Today's video is all about props. How to use props, how to choose props, how to replace them with household items so you don't have to spend a ton of money. And I'm going to also show you how it is that I set up my space at the beginning of any yoga practice that I practice at home. So if you are looking to learn more about how to make your own at-home yoga practice more supportive, cozy, and accessible for you, then stick around. Welcome to Yoga with Carolyn, teaching empaths and sensitive souls just like you how to create a collaborative relationship with your body through cozy, accessible yoga and self-care practices in order to live a life filled with less doing and more being. All right, my lovely. So this is a totally unscripted video. I just got inspired by the fact that I tend to kind of gloss over yoga props when we practice together, and I thought that it might be really helpful for us to sit down and be like, all right, what are yoga props? What are things for me to look for when it comes to choosing yoga props? Do I have to buy yoga props or can I just use stuff at home? And what are the different props for and how can I actually incorporate them into my practice? So start the yoga mat. So my yoga mat is like 10 years old. I've been using the same mat for a very long time. And I also got the question once by a student a few weeks ago, what do you use to wash your mat? I don't really. The biggest thing, honestly, I feel like there's like two different things that you might want to be looking for in a yoga mat. Actually, maybe three. So one is stickiness. So depending on what type of practice that you explore, if you're doing more of an active practice, a practice where you are exploring more downward facing dogs, more sun salutations, warrior poses, then it's really helpful to have a mat that is really sticky. And so there's a few different brands that I'll leave in the description box below that I have had really good experience with when it comes to a really sticky mat. The other thing that you might want to look for is if you're practicing a style that's more low to the ground, you're more on your knees, you're on your back, you're on your belly, then it's a little bit more comfortable to have a mat that's like squishier. So the sticky factor is a little less important and the squishy, soft factor will be more important. So that is another kind of criteria that you might want to look for when it comes to a yoga mat. If you're new to the yoga practice, I would suggest that you don't get too caught up on getting the best of the best yoga mat because it can take a little while to find the one that you really like. So my first yoga mat, I think, was just from like Winners and it was like $10. So you can absolutely start there. And honestly, if you're practicing a style that's really low to the ground, like yin, we do a lot of yin in this channel, you don't even really need a mat for most of those practices. You can just use a blanket. So that's my 2 cents when it comes to a yoga mat. Oh, and the third criteria is length. So if you're quite tall, then you can actually find some yoga mats that are made in a way that are a little bit longer than most, because sometimes it's not very comfortable to be lying on your back and have your heels or your head touching the ground, depending on if you're practicing on hardwood floors or not. All right, so now let's move on to blankets. So I typically use 2 different types of blankets. So this is a thinner blanket that I will use as either a folded up prop, so to lift up the floor. So I'll fold it up like this and then this will be something that I can sit on. And then a plushier blanket will be used when I'm gonna be hanging out on the mat for a while. So again, if I'm gonna be on my knees or if I'm gonna be on my back for a while, because especially if you're lying on your back for many minutes, over time, the more your body softens, your heels as well as the back of your head tend to sink into the ground a lot more. And those areas of the body are pretty bony. And so sometimes it's not very comfortable to just be lying directly on your yoga mat. So a really plushy blanket underneath of your body is a really nice way to set your mat up. So these are the 2 different ways that I will the 2 different blankets that I will typically grab when it comes to my practice. So a little bit more of a strengthening practice or even just like a gentle hatha, I'll grab a thinner blanket. And then if it's gonna be a yin, then I'll grab a plushier blanket. This is also like a massive blanket. I think it's like a queen bed size. So then the next prop is a bolster. So a yoga bolster is typically more used in the yin yoga practice. And times that you would be using a bolster would be in heart openers. So if you're lying on your back and you're practicing shapes where you're opening across the heart, or when you're practicing any sort of forward folds, a bolster is a really nice prop to raise the floor up, but without it being something that's really hard like a yoga block. So it's a lot more soft and it's a lot longer, so it can help support more surface level on your body. So like the entire torso, the entire spine, or the back of your knees if you're lying on your back. So yoga bolster is a really, really great prop. However, they're pricey. So that's where a DIY yoga bolster comes into play. Honestly, I only just got this bolster probably about 3 months ago, and I have been teaching for almost 10 years. And for the most part, I use this DIY yoga bolster. I'll leave a link in the description box below to how I actually made this very yoga bolster. So that video came out about a year ago. So I'll leave that in the description box below. So bolsters are a really helpful prop, more specifically for the yin yoga practice. Straps. So again, you're going to notice a theme here. I don't really like to spend a whole lot of money when it comes to my props. So yoga straps. What are yoga straps helpful for? Typically, they are really helpful when it comes to trying to reach a specific limb in your body that you can't really reach very comfortably. So again, a forward fold. If you're looking to reach your toes and you can't very comfortably, then don't. Use a strap. If you're looking to reach behind you, reach your hands. So if you're looking to connect your hands at the back end of your body in your practice and you can't comfortably, don't use a strap. So a strap is a really, really great prop, again, when it comes to trying to reach for something, but you can't without causing pain or strong discomfort, or you just don't want to cause that sort of strain in your body, then a yoga strap is a really great prop. You will notice this is not actually a yoga strap. So I don't actually own one. This is a bathrobe tie. And this is honestly what I typically use when it comes to using a strap. All right, meditation cushion. So when it comes to being seated on the floor, for a large majority of us, it is not very comfortable to be seated directly on the floor. So if you're seated in hero's pose like I am, or if you're seated in a cross-legged position, it doesn't feel comfortable for your hips, your low back, for your knees, and that's okay. It doesn't mean that there's something wrong with your body. It just means that props might be really helpful. So in those cases, that's when I would use my seated meditation cushion. But again, these can be a little pricey. So you can use literally just a cushion off of your bed, off of your couch, place that underneath of your hips, or that would be where your folded up blanket will come into play. And if that is not high enough, then get really crafty, get curious about what will work for you, get creative about what will work for you. So raise the floor up as much as you can when you're seated on the ground. And if seated on the ground, even with these props is not comfortable, then a chair. Use a chair. If you happen to practice somewhere in your home where you've got a couch nearby, and when you start at the beginning of the practice in a seated meditation, it's not comfortable to be on the ground, then start on the couch. Start there, and then as the practice goes on, make your way off of the couch and bring yourself onto the ground. Okay, last prop, yoga blocks. Yoga blocks are, if you're gonna have anything, blocks are your friends. So when it comes to yoga blocks, how are these helpful? My goodness, I use them in almost every single pose. So if you've practiced any of my videos, then you will see that we use these pretty much in every single class. There's a couple different kind of sizes, so you can get this thinner size, or you can get one size that's actually about almost the height of 2 thinner blocks stacked on top of each other. You can get them in foam, or you can get them in wood or in cork. So wood and cork are nice because they've got a weight to them, so they might not move quite as much. And then the foam blocks are nice because they're a little bit softer and they're also sticky. So there are some poses where it's really helpful to have this stickiness of the block against your yoga mat to help create support, but you don't want that block to be sliding. So this would be the only prop that I would say purchase some. they're very, very inexpensive. I'm in Canada and we have a Dollarama here in Canada, and I think I got these blocks for $3 or $4 from the dollar store. So I would strongly recommend that if you're gonna get any sort of props in your yoga practice, blocks are gonna be the most helpful. If you don't happen to live in a place, I have lived in the middle of nowhere and it is hard sometimes to go shopping and sometimes you don't feel like buying off of the internet, then if you have a few books at home, that can also work. So I grabbed my biggest Harry Potter books as my example. So you can see here it pretty much creates the exact same height. As long as you're not too worried about squishing those blocks, or squishing those books rather, then you can use books as well. Why would you use a yoga block? Pretty much at any moment in the yoga practice where you are looking to raise the floor up. So if you are in a standing lunge, if you are in a standing forward fold, if you're in a balancing pose and your hands are looking to connect to the ground, or you've got one foot that's looking to connect to the ground or just add a bit more stability, a block is always going to be your helpful tool to help raise the floor up so you're not having to reach down and forward and then become off balance or create some pinching or pain in your body. So that's kind of like a rough overview in terms of how blocks are going to be really helpful. So the other thing that I wanted to talk about in this video is how to actually set up your yoga mat when it comes to coming to your yoga practice. If you have practiced with me before, then I do tend to try and list off the props that we'll be using in a practice. And I am really committed to trying and be more clear about what props that you might want to use when it comes to practicing in specifically my videos. However, I will say personally, when it comes to my own yoga practice, I will always set my mat up the same way so that then when the practice starts, I don't have to get up and go grab something if I don't happen to have it. So I'm going to show you how I set up my mat when it comes to more of a hatha practice. And then I'm going to show you how I set up my mat when it comes to practicing a yin yoga class, because those are the two styles that we typically will explore in my channel at least. All right. So this is how I would set up my yoga mat if I am making my way into a hatha yoga practice or a gentle yoga practice. So first, I've got the blanket set up in the middle of the mat. The reason for the blanket being set up at the very beginning of the practice is that typically the way that you make your way into a yoga class is that you'll start seated, you'll start on the ground, then you'll make your way onto your knees. And so the blanket's a really, really helpful tool to add some cushioniness. I don't think that's an actual word, but that's okay. Add some cushioniness to your yoga mat. And the reason that I have it folded up and not covering my entire mat is because you'll be able to make your way into a downward facing dog without having to move your blanket. So then you could have your hands and your feet at the back end of your space. And then usually when I'm in my down dog, I'll like grab the blanket and I'll move it out of the way. Move it out of the way, but then place it so that it's nearby so that when I need it again, I don't have to make my way away of my mat and grab it and put it back on the mat. So blanket folded in the center of the mat is a really helpful way to start. Then meditation cushion, don't get stressed about it being specifically a meditation cushion. So maybe it's your bolster, maybe it's another folded up blanket, maybe it's a block or a cushion off of your couch or your bed, because the large majority of the time you will start in a seated position at the beginning of a yoga class. So that's all ready to go. Yoga blocks. Yoga blocks are positioned at the front end of your mat on either side of your mat, because when you make your way into the practice, typically when you're going to start wanting to use your blocks is when you make your way into either your downward dog or your standing forward fold or your lunges. So those are ready to go on either side of your mat at the front end of your space. If you do know, however, that it's more accessible for you to walk your hands back to come into a standing forward fold at the back end of your mat, then switch it up. Place your blocks at the back end of your space so that they're ready for you when you get there. And the last few things is a strap is always a nice thing to have in either hatha or yin. And then a bolster, because if you're practicing Shavasana, bolster is a really nice tool to bring underneath of your knees when you're lying on your back. And the bolster's at the back end of your space, so that then you don't have to look at it the entire practice. And once you make your way onto your back, it's going to be right up over your head, and you can just grab it and position it underneath of your knees. All right, so that's how I would suggest that at any time you make your way to your mat for a hatha yoga practice, this is how you set up your mat. Now, let's take a look at how you would set it up if you're coming into a yin yoga practice. Okay, so this is how I personally set up my mat when I know that I'm coming into a yin yoga practice. So I've covered my entire yoga mat with a really soft, plushy blanket. And the added bonus of this blanket is that it's so big that it's folded in half, so that once I make my way into Shavasana, I only have to unfold it once, and then I still have blanket underneath of me and blanket on top of me. So that's kind of the added bonus if you do happen to want to use a really big blanket, but don't get too stressed out about that. But just covering your entire mat with the blanket is really helpful. There are some poses in the yin yoga practice that it might be helpful to have this stickiness of your mat. In that case, usually it's only going to be on either end of your mat. So if that ever happens, then you can just fold over your blanket, and then you've got the stickiness of your mat that's available ready for you. The reason that I don't set up my blocks at the front end of the mat on either side is because the blocks are used a little bit differently in your yin yoga practice. So it's really helpful for you to have all of your props at the back end of your space, all kind of close to you, so you don't have to move around too much. And I don't place my meditation cushion typically right on my mat to begin, because when you start a yin yoga practice, you don't actually always start seated. Sometimes you start on your back, sometimes you start on your belly. There's lots of different ways that you can start. So if all of the props are ready there at the back end of your space and you've got this space really clear, then you're ready to go for whatever the class will be and however it will start. And again, I've got pretty much the same props that I had before. So 2 blocks, yoga bolster, strap, and a meditation cushion. An extra blanket might be really helpful if you want to have a blanket underneath of you and then on top of you. Yeah, that's pretty much it. So again, the things that we went over today in this video are, what are all the different props that can be really helpful? What props do you really need, and what props do you maybe kind of need, and what household items can you use in order to replace those props and not have to buy them, and then the different ways in which you can set up your yoga mat in your yoga practice. So I hope that this is really helpful. Please let me know in the comments below if you did find that this was helpful, or if you have any other tips and tricks to let other students know as to how you set up your yoga mat, because this is very much how I do it, but maybe you have your favorite go-to way to set it up, and I would love to hear it. Let me know in the comments below. If you're not subscribed to the channel already, I would absolutely be honored to have you as a subscriber. That's the best way for you to support this channel so that you can find more free online accessible yoga. Thank you so much, and I will see you next time.